Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with the Thursday night football preview between the Bears and the Commanders. Gonna go through DFS and props for tonight to make sure you're ready to take on this single game slate. So a lot to get into. Let's go ahead and start it off with a look at the DFS slate. The main thing we're going to focus on for the DFS side is the script side of things, because if you were thinking about playing a 4-2 commander stack with potentially Justin Fields and one pass catcher as your buyback, well, I hate to break it to you, that is going to be by far the most popular pick tonight. So if you're playing in a large field contest, GPP sort of format, you really want to be thinking about the ownership and game theory side of things. So personally, I would try and get off that 4-2 commander stack, potentially take it to a 5-1 Redskins stack if you really do think the Redskins are going to control the game. Of course, with that 6-point spread favoring the home side, a lot of people are going to buy that narrative. So I think if you're in those large field contests and you don't want to eat all of that ownership, a good way to get a little bit different would be to take it to the extreme. Right? Go with the 5-1. Maybe make your one Bears player Justin Fields naked and just hope that it's a relatively low output affair from that offense and that maybe he scores a rushing touchdown, has like 50 rushing yards, 100 passing yards, that sort of thing. And it's that type of game. Outside of that, though, of course, the obvious pivot would be to go to the Chicago side. I think if you take a few unique 3-3 builds, potentially with a Bears captain outside of Justin Fields, that would be a real easy way to get leverage to the field. But even with some of the more chalky captains in a 3-3, right, you just add in one, sub 5% owned player, and you're looking at a relatively unique lineup. Scripts are always a good place to start, but now let's talk about a few of the key players that you might want to consider in very specific builds. So first and foremost, a player I want to point out here is Roschon Johnson, who is getting a little bit of steam in terms of ownership, but I think if you're looking at a Commanders heavy stack, especially if you're going with like a 4-2 stack for the Commanders, if you use Roschon Johnson as your pairing with Justin Fields, I think it might be a little bit sneaky. And for evidence of the kind of passing upside that he brings, look at week 1, right, where he went 6 for 6 on his targets, had 6 catches, which of course is an absolute PPR monster at this kind of price tag. He's also somebody that gets mixed in with the run game too. So if you think that the Commanders are going to get out to a lead, I think a little bit of a sneaky option would be to pair up Justin Fields with a Roschon Johnson, and then the caveat being for large field contests that you're either going to have to leave salary on the table in that 4-2 kind of build, or potentially get to a really contrarian option on the Redskins. I'm talking about, your Equanimous St. Browns of the world, potentially even punting with a backup tight end like Cole Turner, at least for the large field contest, right? Because if you are going with that 4-2 Commanders build, Bears build, you're going to have a lot of issues when it comes to duplication, getting leverage to the field, all those things that we worry about when it comes to game theory. But there are a few ways that you can handle that kind of lineup. You can also take a look at Khalil Herbert if you're looking at a Bears type of build, or even in some of the 3-3 builds. Unlike some of the other players here in the 8K range, he's slightly lower owned than some of the counterparts. And I think in some of the Bears heavy builds, his ownership in those builds is probably going to be closer to like 50-60%. Personally, I'm probably going to have him closer to like 80-85%, right, in my Bears heavy builds. He's by far the more rushing heavy sort of player, right? When they're playing from behind, Roschon Johnson's playing a lot more snaps. So just something that, I think when you're playing the Bears scripts, right, you want to cater your running backs to what you're expecting, right? If you think the Bears are going to hold on, make it competitive, maybe you side with Khalil Herbert at slightly lower ownership. Or of course, if you're going with the chalky side with the Commanders, you consider somebody like a Roschon Johnson. Few other things to point out here. So in terms of your running backs on the Commanders, I think that Brian Robinson is and should be one of the better plays on the slate. That's reflected both with ownership and with the projections over here. But frankly, I'm surprised he's only 51.5% owned. So if by the time we get to lock, this ownership projection holds, which of course, guys, I'm updating these a ton throughout the day. So there's a good chance that by the end of the day, people catch on and that Brian Robinson's higher owned than 51.5%. But as of right now, my projections have him severely underutilized. So I like that. But even Antonio Gibson, right? I know he's not a sexy pick. He's not projecting for nearly as much volume as a Brian Robinson. But if you do think the Commanders are going to lead and you are going to go with a 5-1 stack, maybe you play both running backs, right? You assume that Brian Robinson does a lot of the early damage, as he typically will do in games, right? He plays a lot more of the first half snaps. And if they do get a commanding lead, which could very well be the case, especially if Justin Fields makes a few mistakes, then Gibson could get a lot of that second half run. He's more of a receiving threat at this point, but if they get a massive lead, they're not going to run Robinson into the ground. I just can't see him having 30 carries tonight when they have such a viable backup in Antonio Gibson. I think rather than giving all 30 carries to a Robinson in that sort of script, I think it'd probably be like a 20-10 split. And at $3,200, if one of those 10 carries goes for a touchdown, that's how you find your way into the optimal lineup, particularly in an onslaught kind of script. So I like Antonio Gibson, especially if you're looking at like a 5-1 Washington stack. And he's one of the few ways, even in 4-2 stacks, that I think you get a little bit different than the rest of the field, right? I know it feels a little ugly in a 4-2, right, to play two running backs from the same team. But if you're going to take that chalky 4-2 commander stack, then maybe you play two of your commanders as both running backs for that team. So just a few things to consider. Over here for the Bears side of things, if Equanimeous St. Brown scores a long touchdown, right, that could get him into the optimal lineup, and he's only $1,800. Tyler Scott is playing a few snaps for the Bears as well, and he's only $200. So to me, that brings a little bit of intrigue. You could take a look at Robert Tonyan. These backup tight ends always are a little bit live for some action. Same thing with Cole Turner there as well. But outside of that, guys, with this showdown slate, just know what kind of contest you're entering. If you're in the large field GPPs, my recommendation would be to avoid those 4-2 stacks for the Commanders, the ones that are going to be all that popular. And if you're in a smaller field contest, maybe it's a single entry, maybe it's a cash contest, I don't worry about that all that much, right? Maybe you go with that 4-2 stack that seems pretty optimal tonight. But in large field contests, you should be playing for first place. You should be playing to get different to the field and doing it in an educated manner. Because even though there is a 6-point spread tonight, right, that's pretty large for an NFL game, let's be honest. Crazy things happen, right? You see underdogs pull off upsets, and even if this is just a competitive game, that 3-3 stack might be what you have to have, right? Maybe it's even like a 4-2 stack for the Bears where somehow the defense gets there with the defensive touchdown or the kicker ends up optimal, right? There are weird 4-2 stacks for the Bears that could be extremely live there too. So it'd be my recommendation to check out those sort of builds and potentially skew your lineups in that direction. In terms of props, there are 3 on the board currently that I really like for tonight's game. So first off, we got Roschon Johnson over 1.5 receptions, where he's currently about -135 on Draftkings. I believe over in Caesars, he was -199 as of last look. And on a few other smaller books, he's in the -150 to -175 range. So you're looking at a lot of value if you're looking for a plus EV prop. But more importantly, it also fits the likely game script. Though it's going to be chalky for DFS, the Redskins are likely to control this game. So it'd be crazy to play off that kind of script, right? I mean, if Vegas is calling for that, we know their track record over the last 3-4 years. We should probably give it a little bit of credence, especially when we're betting 50-50 props. And if you expect that to come to fruition, right, the Redskins to dominate most of this game, well, Roschon Johnson's going to get one more playing time, but also is going to have more setup passes for him, right? Screens when you're playing from behind, or just those leak out checkdowns that you have for the last 2-3 quarters when you're in pass first mode, or how Roschon Johnson had those 6 catches in week 1. So he had 6 week 1, 2 week 2, 2 in week 3, and just 1 catch last week, which is why we're catching this line now at just 1.5 receptions. And considering the matchup, I think that that is a mistake, and a lot of the sportsbook odds around the industry seem to agree with that. On top of that, over an Underdog, we have TJ Edwards over 8.5 tackles plus assists, another prop that is heavily juiced in our favor. In fact, on Draftkings, which is one of the more conservative books when it comes to juice, he's over there at -145. Over in Caesars, he's upwards of -150 to hit this, and even on more of the conservative books out there, outside of those two, have him at least -130 for the over. So on Prize Picks, he's already at 9 tackles. I'd expect this one to get bumped relatively soon when it comes to Edwards. So if you're watching this video, checking out this preview before the game, probably hop on that prop as soon as humanly possible. And then the last one we'll touch on here is going to be the Brian Robinson over rushing yards, which is also heavily juiced in our favor across the industry. It's minus 130 over there on DraftKings. It's been hovering in the minus 135 range for a few minutes, a few little time periods from time to time. And also over there in Caesars, other books like FanDuel, he's actually upwards of what I think it's 66.5 yards over there on FanDuel. Also at that number on Prize Picks. You have the juice in our favor. We have other projections that are higher. I think a few books even have them at 67.5 rushing yards at this point. So clear value on all three of these props. And they also fit the same kind of narrative, right? Because let's go through it. We assume that the Redskins are going to control this game, control the time of possession, all those sort of fun things. First off, Brian Robinson's going to get a lot more carries, right? I think around 20 in that kind of game script, which would be well over the 64.5 rushing yards here. It also gives more tackling opportunities to somebody like a TJ Edwards that is mostly a run stopper for that defense. And then also, if they're, Redskins are going to be playing from ahead, the Bears are playing in a pass first mode, Roschon Johnson is getting even more of those targets like we mentioned before. So this one has a lot of correlation to it. You could enter it as a standard pick. That would probably be my recommendation. But even if you go over there and take it as an insured pick, probably something you consider there too if you want to be a little bit more conservative. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the Thursday Night Football preview. Nothing over there on Prize Picks as there isn't a ton of value that I'm attacking at this point, especially when Underdog has some of the more attractive lines as of right now. So that's what I'm doing. If value opens up before lock, which is extremely likely like most slates, I'll go ahead and post it there on the Patreon page. As with all the projections that you see in the videos, everything that's blacked out is of course posted over there for my Patreon members, including my player pool, the different scripts that I'm running for tonight, some of the player notes on everyone in the field so that you have an idea of how I'm deploying them to go out there and have an educated process for your Thursday night lineups. So check that out if you want access to all of those projections. It goes a long way with supporting the channel and gives you an easy way to go out there and research every slate and go out there and build your lineups. So check it out down in the description. Go ahead, like the video on the way out of here, and also go ahead and comment down below your top captain for tonight for a chance to win a free month of my Patreon. All you have to do is go out there, guess who your top captain is going to be, and then if you can guess their winning score within 2.5 fantasy points, you'll go ahead and we'll win that free month. So go ahead, comment your captain down there and what you think they're going to put up in terms of a captain score. I appreciate the support, guys. Best of luck with these lineups, with any prop slips that you're going with for tonight, and let's go out there and have ourselves a night.